Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Interceptor Research's Final Fantasy and Religion. Today talking about FF3. Final Fantasy III was released in Japan only in 1990, so much like Final Fantasy II, it took a while to get over here to the West. And that also places it time-wise about 2 years, but more like a year and a half after Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy III goes back to the Final Fantasy I form. The protagonists are nameless, you pick the job classes, and there's actual job classes, and the theme is more Zoroastrian than Christian. But continuing with the development of the second game, there is nevertheless more depth to the story. You can switch job classes at any time, and there's also Moogles, which has no effect on the story, but it's a very important introduction, so we all need to have a moment to be excited about Moogles. Yay, Moogles! So, the story is pretty simple. The world was created, the earliest civilization of the ancients fell because they overused the crystals. So that, if you remember back to Final Fantasy I, there was the early air civilization that fell because a monster attacked. So here we have monsters to blame versus now the human misuse of power. So an important shift in the ideology of the games. There are the Gulgans, who I don't think we really know anything about, but they do prophesy that this will happen again, which makes sense because humans. Yeah. 1,000 years ago, there was this great mage Noah, or Magus as he's called in the game, which is kind of confusing. But anyway, he exists. He's got a lot of powers, I guess. Like a lot of powers. Because he has 3 students, and he gives them all gifts when they complete their training. And these gifts are like, not a gift certificate. Doga earns the ability to something. I actually forgot what he got. Oh, well, that explains why I didn't really remember. Doga's just given vast magical power. Okay. Cool. Une is given power over sleep and dreams. And Xande is given mortality. Woo! So now we're kind of introducing this theme of mortality, which again we saw in Final Fantasy I, and not really Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy II was much more interested in defeating hell, which, I mean, you do kind of defeat death when you defeat hell, but it gets a little bit more complicated. Final Fantasy I, the main villain, Chaos / Garland, wanted to live forever, so he created a time loop. And here Xande is told, congratulations, you're gonna be mortal, and that freaks him out. And so he finds a way to stop time by destroying the crystals. Okay. Now, that doesn't work out super well because he only stops time on the surface level. There's a civilization above of the floating continent. Yeah, okay. And time is still going then. So Xande is like, oh crap, I have to destroy those crystals too, which will cause even greater damage, but I don't want to die, so this is worth it. And so again, bringing up that big theme of confronting mortality and embracing it and realizing that it can be a gift, which is very difficult for a lot of humans. They don't see why it can be a benefit. So, totally understandable reaction from Xande. Sorry, I'm being fidgety this morning. Okay. Now, of course, Final Fantasy being Final Fantasy is not just that simple. And in the bigger scale, Xande is being manipulated by the Cloud of Darkness, which is essentially an agent of chaos, to bring everything back to the void. So, as I said before, this is again a very Zoroastrian struggle between order and chaos, and chaos is getting the upper hand, but the good guys win. Hooray! This time, as I mentioned with the first civilization, there is more blame placed on the human agency. The civilization fell. Noah made this choice that caused Xande to go crazy, and Xande went crazy. Whereas Garland, he feared death, but there was no stated, background for that. Why was he so afraid of death? Here, it's somebody who presumably was immortal before, now became immortal, and that freaks him out. So even though we have this Zoroastrian tale, like with Final Fantasy I, the religious beliefs of the people within the world are pretty unclear. But it actually reminds me of a talk I went to this week on Catholicism in Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion. And in some of his letters, Tolkien writes about how Lord of the Rings is a very Catholic, a very religious story, and for that reason he took out references to cult practices. And so I'm really seeing that in Final Fantasy. These stories are deeply religious, right? These stories are deeply about humanity confronting great powers and great evil that is trying to destroy the world. Very Zoroastrian or Christian in the case of Final Fantasy II. But there are very few references to cult practices. And I think we're going to see a bit of a switch as we go. We're going to get games that are sort of less religious but have more religion in them. But we'll see. We'll see if that pans out. I'm not entirely sure yet because I do this one episode at a time. I will say this for Final Fantasy III though. There is more emphasis on the temples for crystals and also the people who protect the temples. So in this case we have Arya Bennett, the last water maiden. And a water maiden, of course, is a priestess for the Temple of Water. So we have someone designated to protect the temple, to protect the crystal. She leads our protagonists there and lets them do their work. And story-wise, that makes sense because there's already been that fall of humanity, and there's already been that Gulgan prophecy that this is going to happen again. So Final Fantasy I, the world was still pre-lapsarian, I would argue, or at least more on that side. It hasn't quite worked out that, oh, there's trouble, there be trouble here, although there is a prophecy. This game has experienced loss, has gone on longer has the prophecy that is going to happen again, as opposed to 4 warriors will appear when we need them. I love Final Fantasy 1. So, as a reaction to that fall, mankind works on this cult to protect its relationship to the crystals and protect themselves. So, in Final Fantasy 3, there are enough details for us to know that there is a religious system and there is depth to the interaction between the powers that be and humans, but they don't get into the details of what is a magus? Are they all immortal? What? The mages, they seem to be superpowers, and there's these ancient people, and then there's the weird summoner village, and there's the summons. So there's still a lot of details that to fit in together. But it's better than Aliens. And you'll see what I mean next time when I talk about Final Fantasy IV. So until then, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. Interceptor out.